I always judged mistresses, but I never imagined I would be one of them. That sentence tasted like iron as I rehearsed it in the mirror, practicing the tragedy I would later perform for other people, the tremble in the voice, the averted eyes, the confession delivered like a wound I didn't choose. It would make me look naive, soft, unlucky. It would make them forgive the parts of the story I omitted. And it would distract from the truth. I had volunteered for this. I had trained for it. I had courted it with the dedication of a monk learning silence. I met him at a charity gala my company sponsored in May. The theme was rebuilding futures, and the banners rose from the marble like doomed sailcloth. I wore a dark blue dress with sleeves, small diamonds in my ears, the first pair I'd bought after I signed my lease on a new apartment with a kitchen half as big as my old one. I moved through the room with the smile of someone who knew where the cameras were. When I saw him, I didn't hesitate. His name was David. He had the sort of face that aged into charm, a soft jaw, a hint of tiredness, a smile that felt like a concession he was happy to make. Everyone in the room knew him. His firm had built 3 towers that redefined the skyline and ruined the shadows of 5 nearby parks. He was rich in the way that made wealth feel like climate, something you moved through without noticing until it suffocated you. I'd memorized what he liked: Scotch neat, women who didn't interrupt, conversations that let him teach. He asked what I did, and I told him the truth in a way that sounded like a lie. I told him less than I could have. Not that I'd spent 2 years at a glossy magazine, not that my features had begun to gain traction, not that I'd been offered, once, my own column. I didn't tell him how, in the middle of that ascent, a woman named Mara decided I had climbed high enough. He loved stories. He liked stories about himself best, how he had chosen his first contractor, why he thought the city would forgive him for the tower that shook in the wind, but he tolerated stories about other people as long as they made him feel generous. I fed him scenes, my childhood in a small river town, the winter our basement flooded and the neighbors brought over a crock pot of stew, the day I quit the magazine without screaming. He nodded. He understood. He didn't, but he thought he did, and sometimes that's the more profitable posture. When he kissed me for the first time, it was behind a column while someone announced an auction lot. He smelled like cedar and patience. He pulled back as if surprised by himself and looked at me with an apology that asked me to absolve him in advance. I smiled like a benediction. I had practiced that too. There are different schools of revenge. Some people dream of fire. Others keep knives in polite drawers. Mine needed 2 ingredients: proximity and belief. To touch a life without being thrown off, you must become plausible in it. For that, you need faith, either yours or theirs. Faith is cheaper to borrow. I had chosen David because Mara had chosen him first. A year earlier, when still at the magazine, I'd reported an investigation into an irregular series of loans that were laundered through a non-profit and ended up inflating the value of a waterfront property David's firm acquired for pennies. I worked quietly, built trust with 2 former employees, pulled tax filings, learned the rhythms of shell companies. Mara knew. She had stood in my doorway at 7 on a Thursday and said, "This is your Pulitzer, or your termination." She meant that kindly, the way people mean threats when they love the soft brilliance of their own candor. She was the investigations editor, the beloved star, the woman who never went home before midnight. She wore the exhaustion of heroes. 3 weeks before my piece was meant to run, the story was killed. Not rewritten. Not delayed. Killed. A message from up high, legal concerns, sources recanting, the non-profit threatening to sue. I had notes and recordings and fact-check memos as thick as a prayer book. It didn't matter. Mara told me to pivot to something reader-forward about public school cafeterias and supply chain prices. Then she walked the waterfront with David 2 days later. There were photos, her black blazer, his hand lifted as if the world were a model he could point out flaws in. I didn't know for sure. I didn't need to. 2 months after that, I was out. Not fired. Reassigned to a desk that faced a cinderblock wall and given a beat that made me feel like a ghost. Event listings, small profiles of people doing small good work, the occasional Q / A with a chef who had once been in prison and now plated verbs with edible flowers. My therapist told me that what I'd experienced was institutional betrayal. I told her that what I'd experienced was Mara. I quit in winter. In spring, I saw their engagement announcement. The caption was brutal in its cleanliness. 2 builders of civic life to marry this fall. I read it 3 times, thinking I had misread the air itself. I scrutinized the photo for seams. All I found was the solidity of their beauty. Her, with her chin lifted and eyes clear. Him, with his hand on her waist as on a rail he had installed himself. In the corner, the name of the house where they'd held a fundraiser peaked like a signature. David's. I didn't plan to become his mistress immediately. I planned to become his problem. But it turned out the best route to that was through appetite. Men like him are the easiest gates to open. They swing inward, and they rarely check who's behind them. Our affair was efficient. He was busy. I was busier than he realized, but my busyness looked like availability because I controlled it. We met for drinks, for dinners, for a night in a hotel that called itself a residence and put cookies on the pillow. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind, not in the way that counts. He thanked me for understanding. He told me he felt alive in a voice usually reserved for boats. He talked about his wedding as if it were a movie someone else had scripted for him, a good movie that would help him win awards. He ordered omelets with herbs and sent back anything that arrived with a smear he didn't recognize. I kept my receipts. The literal ones, because I intended to submit an invoice later to someone who hadn't hired me. And the metaphorical ones, the texts, the times, the lies shaped for convenience, the jokes about donors he shouldn't have made. I didn't want a scandal. I wanted precision. To ruin Mara the way she had ruined me, I needed to break her in her language. Not with gossip. With the thing she trusted above all else, a story. I knew what kind of story would take. People would forgive a woman who loved the wrong man. People would not forgive a woman who participated in burying truth. I needed to prove that Mara had known about the waterfront fraud and had helped kill the peace to protect her future husband. The challenge was proof. Proof is tedious. It rarely kisses you in a hallway. It lives in calendars and CC lines, in edits that used to exist and deletions that still do. I had friends at the magazine. Fewer now. Even fewer once I started asking. But I had one, Tessa, a copy editor whose brilliance was the kind that noticed when someone exchanged a comma for a breath. If there was any residue in the system of what had happened to my story, she could find it. I met her in a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and distance. Why? She asked when I told her what I wanted. Because she took something from me and called it care. Tessa's mouth trembled the way it did when she was making a decision that would affect her sleep. If I help, I'm done here. You're already done here, I said gently. They'll cut the copy desk to save money next quarter. You know that. She smiled like I had flattered her and then nodded like I had wounded her. You didn't hear that from me. We worked. She gave me metadata, the ghost maps of drafts. She showed me the version history of my killed piece and the way edits had accumulated like barnacles, then vanished. She shared the internal ticket where legal raised questions that read as genuine until, 2 hours later, a note from Mara appeared in a thread marked private, will reframe. Not urgent. Shifting focus to student meals piece. Not kill this. Not save him. But the timing sang with a key everyone could hear. I matched the timestamps with David's calendar. That meant getting his calendar. He was not difficult. He'd once forwarded me an invite to a meeting to show me how very important he was and forgot to remove me from the thread. 10 minutes with the event ID, and I had access to the rest with a password reset. His security questions were the kinds of questions publicists know: mother's maiden name, first dog. I didn't feel clever. I felt like gravity. On the day my story was reframed, David had a 4 p.m. meeting at his office with a woman whose initials matched those of the nonprofit's director, and a 5:30 p.m. walkthrough, blocked as personal. The following morning, Mara sent me a Slack that read, "Let's pivot. You're burnout. I'll carry the waterfront forward later." At 11, she was photographed at a groundbreaking, smiling next to David in a hard hat that had never known sweat. The temple of righteous people is documentation. I had built an altar. Now I needed an audience. If you believe in karma, you wait. If you believe in justice, you work. I wrote an anonymous tip to a competitor who loved nothing more than a story about a rival newsroom's corruption. I included excerpts from the documents, not enough to get Tessa fired immediately, but enough to create appetite. I suggested names of people to call. I gave them a narrative that would allow them to feel brave. Then I did something that felt like a betrayal, even though betrayal had long ago become the water I swam in. I kept seeing David. "Are you happy?" he asked one evening in a booth where the leather swallowed his shoulders. "Right now?" I asked. "Yes. I'm productive," I said. He laughed, not understanding, and kissed the back of my hand like a man trying on old manners. The competitor moved slower than hunger and faster than law. It took 4 weeks. In the meantime, the city marched past weddings and budgets and heat waves that curled the edges of flyers on lampposts. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped liking mirrors. I started walking past the magazine's building at odd hours, looking at the lit windows and imagining who was inside, what jokes they told about me. I didn't want them to suffer. I wanted one person to know she had never been God. The story broke on a Monday. The headline did not name her, not yet. It named the magazine. It named the waterfront. It named the nonprofit and the pattern of edits that softened allegations into questions, removed references to documentable shell companies, and finally vanished an entire piece behind the euphemism of editorial reprioritization. It quoted me without using my name, a reporter who had left for unrelated reasons. It quoted a legal counsel anonymously, noting pressure from above. It characterized Mara as a senior editor involved in the review. The internet behaved like weather. Thunder, then flood, then a strange quiet where people assessed damage before moving on. Inside that quiet, I wrote to David. "Can we talk?" I asked. He called me. He never called. He sounded like someone who had just realized the vault is lighter than yesterday. "Where?" "Anywhere you won't be photographed." He chose his office after hours. When I arrived, the walls shone with the money they had cost. He looked older. He had 2 phones on the desk, like talismans that had failed. I closed the door. "Did you know?" I asked. I didn't define it. We both understood. His laugh was brief and joyous in its cynicism. "Knew what?" "That she killed a story to protect you." He sat back. "You're talking about your piece," he said. He didn't ask how I knew that he knew. He wasn't interested in origins, only in the present negotiation of consequences. "You were reckless. Your sources were unreliable." "You're lying," I said. My voice was calm. "But it doesn't matter. You're not who I came to talk about." I reached into my bag and slid a folder onto his desk. It was theater. He could print anything he wanted from his glossy machines. But paper has weight. He opened it because people like him always open anything that arrives in a leather tote on a Tuesday. Inside, the calendar entries, the Slack screenshots, the draft metadata map drawn by Tessa's careful hand, the photo of him in a hard hat that the competitor had used without understanding how exactly it stitched the timeline. He turned pages slowly. He didn't swear. He didn't confess. He looked, for a moment, like a student in a class he didn't know he had signed up for. "What do you want?" he asked softly. That softness frightened me more than if he'd shouted. "I want you to call off the wedding." He laughed again, differently, a sound like a coin tangled in a drain. "Because of the story?" "Because you don't marry the person you became to survive a lie." He considered me, then the window, then the city beyond it, as if he were calculating a route and whether the traffic would clear. "And if I don't?" I closed the bag. "Then the next piece will name you. And her. And it won't be about ethics. It will be about tax allocation and public funds and where they went." "Blackmail," he said mildly. "A head start," I corrected. He didn't call off the wedding. "If you were expecting a neat lesson, you should stop reading stories written by people like me." What he did do, he postponed it. Indefinitely. The announcement went out through a publicist with the word family in it, the shield everyone knows how to raise. The competitor wrote a second piece. That one named Mara. The magazine issued a statement about standards and a review. Mara was put on leave pending an internal investigation. Tessa sent me a single text. We both knew it would feel worse than victory. I pretended not to understand. David asked to see me. I said yes. We met at a bar that tried to look like a basement, all exposed brick and sincerity. He watched me more closely than before. He had finally decided I was not a pretty accident. If you wanted to hurt her, he said, why come through me? Because she trusts you, I said. And you trust me. And trust is the only currency that spends forever. He smiled without humor. You talk like an editor. I used to. How much did you hate her? He asked. I sipped my drink. Enough to learn patience. He leaned forward. Do you hate yourself yet? I did, a little. I had thought I could operate in filth without smell. That had been the purest lie. That's not what this is, I said, and we both knew I was only half right. 3 days later, I received an email from a burner account with a subject line that was a date. Inside, a link to a folder containing my own drafts from the magazine, my notes, things only someone with access could send. A message. You weren't the only one who kept receipts. I recognized the rhythm of the punctuation. Mara. She did not try to threaten me overtly. She did not need to. The documents made me look obsessive. In some of them, I had speculated about sources in ways that could be framed as unethical if you wanted to. In one, I had written an outline that named a board member as likely complicit before I had proof. It was not illegal, but it could be made to look careless, manipulative, driven by bias. If released, it would muddy waters already soupy with algae. I had anticipated almost everything. I had not anticipated that, at the end, I would be standing on a shore I had polluted. She asked to meet. The subject line of her email was my name. We met in a coffee shop where the chairs were designed to discourage lingering. She wore navy. I wore black. We could have been sisters if you squinted or if you hated women and considered competence an inherited trait. She did not order. She sat down and said, So I said, you did all this because your piece got killed. I did this because you killed it. She tilted her head. I redirected it because legal advised it would expose the magazine to a lawsuit we would lose. You redirected it because you planned to marry a man it implicated. Her mouth flattened. I didn't know I would marry him then. But you were already learning how to stand next to him without flinching. She didn't respond. She was too good to give me a line that could anchor a paragraph. You wanted to teach me a lesson, she said instead. Fine. Consider me taught. You win. You burned the house down and now you're standing in the smoke complaining about your eyes. You set the gas leak, I said. You just thought no one would strike a match. For a moment, she smiled. It made her beautiful in a way different from the photo in the engagement announcement. Do you know the real reason your piece was killed? She asked gently. Yes, I said. Fear. No, she said. Cowardice. Which is different. Fear is healthy. It keeps you from stepping off roofs. Cowardice is fear performing ethics. The publisher was scared of a suit. I was scared of losing my job. Legal was scared of the board. We made a decision dressed as integrity because we wanted to live. Do you want to hear the worst part? I think I'm living it. The worst part is that it wasn't a conspiracy. You wanted to be because that makes you righteous. It wasn't. It was just ordinary failure at the exact moment someone needed us to be extraordinary. You slept with him, I said. It came out smaller than it sounded in my head. She sighed. Eventually. Not then. I don't believe you. That's fine, she said. Belief is a hobby. We sat silently while a grinder screamed behind us. She looked out the window. He postpones the wedding and suddenly I'm the villain, she said. He keeps his contracts, his donors, his towers. I lose my work. And you, what do you get? I get a story, I said. You already had one. You were the only one willing to write it, and we punished you for it. Then you punished me for punishing you. Do you see the circle? I see a spiral, I said. It goes down. She studied me with something like sadness. David will be fine, she said. He's weather. He changes, but always returns. I'm not weather. I'm furniture. When a house floods, furniture swells and is thrown out. You built that house, I said. Yes, she said softly. It doesn't mean I don't love it. She slid a flash drive across the table. This is everything I have on him, she said. Emails, contracts, donations. You already have some. This is more. If you want to keep going, go. Ruin him. Not because he hurt me. Because he will hurt other people, and you're right about that. But don't pretend you're rescuing me. I'm not, I said. I'm not rescuing anyone. Then maybe rescue yourself, she said, and stood. Or at least stop drowning other people because you can't swim. She left. I stared at the drive as if it might reconfigure into an answer. When I picked it up, it was light. It felt like a toy version of power, plastic, and bright. That night, I opened the files. My hands shook in a way that made me laugh. It was almost romantic, the way danger made me feel alive. There were emails discussing creative accounting, contracts with line items that bled into personal expenses, notes to donors promising returns on their philanthropy that were not philanthropic. Any one of them could start a story. Together, they could start a war. I did not sleep. I wrote. Not for the competitor. Not for a magazine that would weigh risk like a fruit at a market. I wrote for myself, which is to say I wrote for no one. I wrote a record that would exist even if no one read it, like a diary that could indict. I described timelines and amounts and names. I described what it does to a person to stand in the doorway of a life and be told to go back. I described watching a wedding burn slowly like wetwood. In the morning, I sent an encrypted archive to 3 places: the competitor, an attorney who represented whistleblowers, and a journalist I didn't love but who would never stop chewing once he liked the taste. I did not attach my name. I did not attach Mara's. I attached documents that needed no author. Then I turned my phone off and walked to the river. Sometimes, when everything you wanted begins to happen, the body refuses to retrofit joy on top of shock. The river was ugly, brown-gray, flecked with plastic, a smell of algae and fuel. It had always been ugly. People posted photos that made it look like silk. The truth was more useful. I leaned on the railing and tried to find the version of me who had only ever judged Mistresses, who thought wrongness was a door you could simply refuse to open. "Are you happy?" David had asked in the booth. "Right now," he'd said. I didn't know now either. I knew I was done. Not with the story. Well, yes, also with the story. I was done with the part of me that believed pain ennobles everything it touches. That part had written the hook. It had gotten me in the room. It had made me persuasive and patient and cruel. A week later, the second wave crested. The competitor published again, and this time it wasn't about an editor's judgment. It was about money. The city attorney announced an inquiry. A donor issued a statement that sounded like a love letter to sunlight. David resigned from 2 boards. He didn't call me. He didn't need to. We understood this phase required silence. Mara wrote me one more time. "You got what you came for," she said. "Now please leave me alone." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to keep fighting. Because I had finally run out of appetite. On a Sunday, I went to see my mother. She lives in the same house where I memorized book spines as patterns and believed that adults knew how to end things cleanly. She hugged me as if I had been missing for longer than I had. We sat at the table and ate strawberries. She asked about work. I told her the partial truth, the same way I had told it to a man at a gala months ago. I said I was writing. She smiled like an applause I didn't deserve. "Do you remember," she asked, "that time in 3rd grade when you told Mrs. Conway you couldn't be the line leader because you didn't want to tell the other kids what to do?" I laughed. "No. You told her leaders make you feel mean," my mother said. "And she said that meant you might be a good one." I thought about that the whole drive home. If goodness is reluctance sharpened by duty, I had failed at both. I had not been reluctant, and I had not acted out of duty. I had chosen revenge. It had felt like justice because someone deserved it. But justice is a structure. Revenge is an instinct. Sometimes they use the same materials, but you can tell them apart by the aftertaste. I kept the diamonds. I stopped wearing them. I did not write the anonymous story about being a mistress. I deleted the mirror rehearsals. If someone asked me, I would tell the truth. I judged mistresses. I became one by choice. I did it to enter a house I could have broken into another way. I did it because I wanted a front row seat at a ruin I had purchased tickets for. I did it because when something is taken from you by someone who calls it care, you learn to mistrust gentle hands. Months passed. The city moved on the way cities do, with fury and then with errands. The inquiry became a case. The case became a settlement. David paid a fine large enough to be called symbolic and small enough to be a line item. He married someone else 2 years later in a different house on a different river. I saw the photos. He looked like weather, temporary, always returning. Mara left town. She teaches a course on ethics at a college that does not ask too many questions of its visiting lecturers. Tessa freelances and sleeps better. The magazine hired a public editor and published a long piece about their commitment to courage. No one mentioned my name. That felt correct in a way that did not make me noble. Sometimes, in the afternoon, I sit at my desk and watch the light slide across the wall and think about Mrs. Conway. Leaders make you feel mean. Maybe I've been a leader in the smallest, ugliest sense, someone who goes first into a fire she lit. I don't regret it. That's the part that should haunt me and doesn't. I regret the dress. I regret the leather tote. I regret how good I was at the performance of being harmless. I regret that I thought, for a while, that love and power were the only instruments, when attention might have sufficed. If you ask me what I learned, I will give you the version that fits on a tote. We are what we do to other people. If you ask me what I want now, I will tell you I want to write about the river honestly, about its ugliness and the way the sunset still finds it, allows it to look like silk for a minute without lying. I want to write about how revenge is a mirror that steals your shape and then returns it altered, and how sometimes the only way to recognize yourself again is to stop staring and walk past, into the day that doesn't care what you did last night. I always judged Mistresses. That part of me still lives somewhere, in a room where the windows are clean and the air smells like linen. I visit her sometimes. I tell her the story of how I stood on a shore I had helped poison and still recognize the sky. I don't ask her to forgive me. I ask her to listen. And most days, she does.